All right. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining the I612's May Educational on Diversity and Inclusion. My name is Jack Harkness. I'm the Director of Educational Events at I612. I want to start off by thanking our sponsors, Sabio, Influential, and Ampersand for making this event possible. We have a great keynote and panel lined up for you today, so we'll get things started with our keynote. Joe Camacho. Joe is Sabio's Chief Global Expansion Officer. Joe is responsible for overseeing the expansion of markets outside of the US. Joe also served as Sabio's Chief Marketing Officer, where he oversaw the marketing strategies for Sabio's brands. Prior to joining Sabio, Joe was CMO of Latin American Multimedia Corp. A Marine Corps vet, Joe currently resides in Los Angeles, where he invests much of his free time hiking and exploring the Gold Coast local beaches and mountains with his wife and two children. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm going to share a few slides with all of you, and I promise, I told Jack, I will be what's called the 3 Bs. I'm going to be bold, be brief, and then I'm going to be gone. So I do again want to thank all of you for allowing me to be here with you today, and thank you for the privilege of speaking to you on a subject that I've been living with my entire life. I want to share some of the things I've learned through life experiences, both personally and professionally, and also how those life experiences have helped me professionally, specifically in the founding and the growth of our amazing Sabio Holdings companies, which are also nationally certified minority-owned businesses. Because at Sabio, which means wise in Spanish, diversity is in our DNA. Like myself, being born into a diverse, multicultural family, my father being a Pacific Islander from the island of Guam, and my mother from Sinaloa, Mexico. Sabio was birthed by a diverse group of founders whose backgrounds and life experiences helped mold our company from the very beginning only 8 years ago, and which we're all extremely proud of today. And while I'm sure you've all been to seminars on the subject of diversity and inclusion, I want to remind everyone why it's so important to us as marketers. Because what we traditionally think of as the general market has rapidly grown into the American multicultural market. Over the last several decades, there have been some seismic shifts in the demographics of our country. A few stats to think about: that while the white population remained the largest ethnicity group in the US, in combination with another group, in other words, folks that identify as being white alone or mixed with another group, that is still the largest group. However, the white alone population has decreased. Similarly, the multiracial population has seen a whopping 276% increase in the last decade. And the Hispanic population, which is now over 62 million individuals, has seen a 23% increase since 2010. One of the nation's fastest growing demographic groups, outpacing the national growth rate of 7%. And again, the Asian population, a whopping 36% growth rate, much, much higher, of course, than the national growth rate. Also interesting to note is that the Hispanic population is very young. The Hispanic median age is 29.8 versus 38.5 for the total US population. Nearly 1/3 of Hispanics are under 18 years of age versus the 22% for the total US population. Nearly half of US born Latinos are younger than 18 years old. And in Minnesota, what we see are some similarities. So, for example, the Hispanic rate in Minnesota, that although Minnesota is below the national average in terms of its minority population size, the growth rates of these segments outpace those of the national average. For example, although the Hispanic population in Minnesota is only 6% and far below the national average, there's been a 38% increase of the Hispanic population since 2010. Similarly, for the African American population, again, only 7% of the Minnesota population is of African American descent, below the national average of 12.4%. We have seen a dramatic increase in the African American population in Minnesota, a 45% increase from 2010 to 2020. And we also see this amongst the Asian population. Minnesota at 5.2% is a little closer to the national average of 6% in terms of the size of the population, but again, outpacing the national average of 36%, a national increase in the Asian population. In Minnesota, we've seen is a 40% increase. Now, many of you are very familiar with these stats, and I'm sure you've heard them all before. But what marketers consistently ask us is, how do we reach the changing demographic landscape? For example, marketers are increasingly becoming aware that the US Hispanic population is predominantly English dominant, English proficient, and that the majority consume their media in English. Therefore, the old ways of reaching Hispanics with Spanish language media isn't working as well anymore, which is one of the reasons we started Sabio in the first place. Aziz, our CEO and co-founder, who is of Indian descent, but doesn't speak Hindi very well, was being targeted with ads in Hindi. It happens to me a lot too. I get ads in Spanish that, while I understand them, I know that their targeting is off. And instead of persuading me to purchase their product or their service, it can get annoying sometimes. So we worked on our tech, hired engineers and data scientists to identify the most predictive data sets, and found that a combination of mobile data, like the apps you have on your smartphones, are a great indicator of your cultural preferences and lifestyle. We like to say, you are what you are. And as the media consumption habits of the American population have changed, so too have our capabilities, which now include even more data sets centered around the household and the devices that they use, thus allowing us to reach a plethora of audience segments defined by not only the language they speak or their ethnicity, but also whether they're an in-market auto buyer or parents of school-aged children who need to do some back-to-school shopping. But building technology was the easy part. The more difficult task was in recruiting, encouraging, and growing our highly talented and diverse workforce. And we get asked this all the time. How did you do it? But again, it wasn't like we set out any diversity goals. We didn't have to. All of the founders were ethnic minorities, and therefore many of the tremendously talented people that we were all connected to also happened to be from ethnically diverse backgrounds. Like I said at the beginning, diversity at Sabio is in our DNA. And I'm proud of our team's accomplishments with respect to diversity, but we can do better. As you see, when it comes to gender, it is close to 50%. We see the diversity amongst the age groups. Obviously, we're very racially diverse, but again, we can do better. I asked our HR director to provide some more details. And again, we've grown tremendously. We're nearly 100 people at this point. And 63% of our senior vice presidents and above from our leadership team are ethnic minorities. However, only 18% are women. We can do better. Pre-pandemic, I was at an industry event in Los Angeles that was taking place at the Beverly Hills Hotel of all places. And it dawned on me how our industry, while thankfully is making strides in recruiting a racially diverse workforce, can be better if thinking about diversity through a dimensional paradigm. I thought to myself, how many of those at this event were truly underprivileged? For example, for myself, the most privileged people that I personally know happen to be individuals with generational wealth, trust funds, private educations, and so forth. My personal experience is that those individuals that I know who are the most privileged happen to be Hispanic, African American, and Asian. In other words, our commitment to inclusivity and diversity must go beyond racial identity to provide opportunities and include those individuals who don't necessarily have the right connections. People like me, who by the grace of God was given opportunities in my life by individuals who believed in me and gave me a chance. I come from a very large family, and I'm the first person in my entire genealogy that obtained a college degree. In fact, with my 10 brothers and countless male cousins, I am of a handful of us that have never spent time in a prison. It is a miracle that I'm here today. And like me, there are people in our company who have been given an opportunity based on their talents and not their birthright or their alma mater. And in closing, I want to challenge not only all of you, but myself, my colleagues, to find talent in unlikely places, to mentor, teach, encourage, and lift up not only those around us, but to actively seek and to meet them where they are. Veterans with leadership skills, discipline, and drive. People with disabilities who can work remotely in our industry. Moms who are returning to work and have tremendous multitasking abilities and tremendous talent. And others who may be in unlikely places, like your receptionist, for example, who has great people skills, is organized, and highly self-motivated. He may be your future top salesperson. Or an intern from a local junior college who has natural talent as a software engineer. In other words, there's talent all around us. And I think I want to challenge all of us to look beyond and beyond the obvious. In other words, a truly diverse workforce that resembles the beautiful country we live in. Not only diverse in every shade of brown or the people that we choose to love, but in those wonderful hues of the experiences undetectable by the human eye. Thank you.
Thank you,
And
Joe.
you're very welcome.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I simply wanted to pass it back to you. Thank you for this time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for your keynote. That was wonderful. We really appreciate it. I think we're going to move on to our panelist section. I'm going to introduce our moderator this afternoon, Jill Peterson from Media Hub. Jill brings 20 plus years of experience across retail, CPG, pharma, and TuneIn to her role as SVP of video investment at Media Hub in Minneapolis. When she's not developing go-to-market strategies for her clients, Jill is busy leading the agency's DEI programming. I just want to welcome Jill Peterson again to an i612 educational.
Thank you, Jack. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our four panelists for this afternoon. First, we have Joe Camacho from Sabio, who we all just heard from in the wonderful keynote speech. Thank you for joining us and sticking around for a little Q&A. And then we have Lataria Coy, who leads ethical media and DEI at Influential, pushing for equitable practices in the creator economy after leading DEI at OMD. She's an idea person at heart with over 15 years in media. honing her branded content skills at both OMD and the New York Times. Lataria holds a bachelor's degree from Clark Atlanta University. Welcome, Lataria.
Thank you, Joe. So happy to be here.
Thank you. And then next we have Ayanna Johnson, who is the Senior Director of DEI and Employee Experience at Ampersand. In her role, Ayanna leads the strategy, programs, and initiatives that connect and enable the culture with an employee experience where DEI, technical talents, and leadership at all levels are developed and celebrated. She started her DEI journey in higher education, working in residence life and student affairs during her time at Keene University and also St. Peter's University, where she earned her master's degree in educational leadership. So welcome to Ayanna.
Thanks, everybody.
And then coming to us from the agency side, Jen Leonard is a 25-year media veteran with experience in strategy planning and buying across a number of different agencies, industries, and brands. Her specialty is multicultural media, and tenure with multicultural agencies ignited a lasting passion for DE&I, which she brings to every role. And just last year, she completed the Leading Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion course at Northwestern University. So welcome to you, Jen.
Thanks so much. I'm really happy to be here.
Great. Happy to have all four of you here. I'm going to start out with some questions kind of more focused on the nuts and bolts of media and what we're doing from day to day. So Jen, I'm actually going to start with you. With the advancements that we've seen in data collection, our ability to leverage data to connect with audiences, based on what they do, what they've bought, the apps on their devices, we're looking at you, Joe, actions online, offline, what measures are needed in developing a media plan that ensures you're reaching people from, diverse backgrounds? If someone is simply trying to reach, working moms, which also, again, I don't know any moms that don't work.
Right.
Wouldn't that data segment include people from all backgrounds, ethnic, racial, socioeconomic, et cetera?
So I think this is one of the most common questions that I hear in media, especially from those who are starting out in the business or haven't had the opportunity to work with a brand who focuses on these audiences before. And I think a lot of agencies in the Midwest, maybe smaller agencies, might fall into this group who haven't worked in a huge national campaign possibly before. So it's good to start with an understanding that not excluding diverse audience segments from a broad group like working moms or the ever popular 18 to 49 age group doesn't mean that you necessarily reach those segments within the broad group in the same percentages that the data tell you should be in your pool. For example, right, if say 40% of diverse, 40% of working moms, the data tells you that 40% of them would be diverse, right? You need to understand that this is a function of, and a reality really, of supply and demand, which is one part of it. And also coupled with how media impressions are sold and guaranteed in media landscape, right? So you're most likely reaching far less diverse impressions within that group than you think. So as Joe said so eloquently, the populations are growing. They have been driving growth in the United States for a long time. We've just had a recent census that opens a lot of eyes, but the census prior to that showed exponential growth as well. So if you think about huge industries that spend millions of dollars specifically targeting multicultural segments, you're going to be talking about the auto industry. Multicultural and diverse populations have been driving auto growth for 10 years. Telecom, music, fashion, beauty is huge. I don't think the beauty industry would exist at the level it does now without diverse populations. I mean, it's driving cultural and everything. So brands spend millions to intentionally target these audiences. They're not going out for women. They are going out for diverse women. They have creative and intentional media plans that segment out, say, Hispanic women versus African American women and Asian women, because they know that high demand populations like this, and I'm sure the Sabio folks that are on this audience will be able to tell you how much demand they have to reach these audiences. They pull impressions from that pool of working moms, right? So if you have a billion-dollar industry that is specifically buying those impressions, then your media publishers will divert those impressions to the campaigns and the brands that are paying for them. That's just as sort of a long way to explain a little bit of that. So at the end, this past 2 years has really only intensified the demand. I mean, it was high before. We've run into situations on many brands where you are in a sold out situation for what are the traditionally underserved populations, because so many more brands are seeing the light and trying to ensure that they're targeting these populations for good reason, right? The growing population base, that's not going to change anytime soon. And that means, longer, more valuable consumers over their product lifetime. So there's a lot of reasons for the demand.
I wanted to add, Jennifer, I think that was like perfect, or Jen, I think that's perfectly stated, and 100% aligned with you. I will say that our company, Influential, focuses on influencer marketing, and that is a really strategic way to reach specific segments in an authentic way. So we know that when you need to show up for audiences, that it has to be authentic, culturally relevant, and you really can get that with influencer marketing. So, obviously we can't target, by segment, we can't target Black audiences and so forth. But what we can do is have a look at who the creator is authentically, who their audiences are, find lookalikes, all these types of things that allow brands to really have deep penetration in a way that makes sense and that's culturally relevant. So there's lots of avenues and ways of going about it, but just if we can just all sort of stay intentional, I think it goes a long way for brands and for audiences as well, because audiences really want to see themselves reflected and creative in a way that rings true.
Absolutely. I think historically, if you're not in a diverse population, you just come with an inherent understanding that all ads that you see were created for you, right? Aside from like blatant miss ads for someone of the wrong gender or someone in a very off age group, you know that advertisers are trying to reach you. You just inherently understand that when you're not diverse, but diverse populations don't necessarily have that understanding. There does need to be intentionality there.
I definitely agree. And I think, brands have definitely improved in how they're showing up both in media and in messaging. We all remember some of the bigger flubs in the past few years, and anywhere from like a Pepsi to, I don't even remember which beauty company it was, but I remember
Several.
Yeah, I mean, more than one. So, Latari, I want to start with you here. How can a brand identify when they are failing to reach, underrepresented communities? And then, once they're aware of it, either through, consumer feedback, because, Twitter is a fabulous, two-way communication tool, or, through agency partners, like what should brands be doing to make changes? Is it their media plan, creative messaging, something else, get a new CMO?
Maybe not get a new CMO. I do think though it requires some introspection, right? So what does the product speak to every community, the community that you want to reach? I think also brands need to do brand lift studies pretty regularly to sort of keep a pulse on things and not just utilize social feedback loops, because sometimes those don't give you everything you need. But just making sure the product is right and making sure that the people that are making decisions about all of those things have diverse representation so that you get that you get feedback from your employees first. On the media tip, like we just want to make sure that that the creative is right, that it's thoughtful, and that that it has been blessed by a diverse pool of folks looking at it. And that comes down to agencies. It even can come down to employee resource groups within agencies. So you don't even have to necessarily work on the business to have a say, and just making sure that companies have are allowing for voices to contribute in a way that they haven't in a while. And I think many companies are getting wise to that. And when they do, they can make changes really, really quickly to make sure that they are serving each community with respect and dignity. And when they do that, it just elevates the bottom line 100%.
Agreed. Jen, from an agency perspective, how would you kind of counsel clients that maybe need to make some improvements in how they're reaching diverse communities?
Well, this is definitely a question that doesn't have a blanket answer that works for every brand, right? That's a super loaded question to unpack, and it depends on so many things. But I would say having a deep understanding of your own current client base is key to understanding where you are, right? Using third-party data, making sure that you're comparing your client base to your consumer makeup, to make sure what your competitive set looks like in terms of their consumer bases. In the auto industry, they use Polk for sales data, and you can parse that out to see where you stand, for example, with the Black community compared to your competitors in the model of cars. It is understanding that deeply to understand where you're not reaching. Why do you have gaps in places? If your population is X% and your sales are 20% below that, but your competitors are all reaching there, then you're not doing something right. Something has to change, right? So you kind of start from that understanding. It's always a chicken and the egg, media versus creative. It's an art and a science. That's why you have so many agencies. They're named something along those lines, right, to address just that. So low-hanging fruit is really what we talked about first, ensuring that you're actually reaching those audiences with some targeted media, understanding how those pools overlap. And then the best practice, I think, is understanding your growth segments at a deep level. And I think Lataria really summed that up in her discussion. Know where you need to prioritize and understand that those segment-specific insights, if you're looking if you have a gap and you're really missing out on Black working moms, for example, then you need to understand the motivations behind Black working moms, the insights of Black working moms, and make sure that those are infused into your entire process. So it's not just reaching them with your media buy, but in your campaign strategy, in your creative development, in like long before you're actually putting together and executing a media plan, just making sure that you're not turning off those segments by the creative that you're using, that you're in the right, relevant places in your media plan. It's the whole funnel. I think the agencies and brands that do it well understand that, and they make sure that they're partnering with the right agencies that can help them hone in on those insights, and they infuse that within the entire process.
Jill, if I can add to
yes,
that,
please.
I think
Jump
both
in.
with Lataria, Lataria mentioned the brand study as an example, and Jennifer, you talked about insights. And I think the wonderful thing is ourselves, Sabio, we have our sister company, which is a data measurement and analytics company, is that in real time, we can measure the campaign. So how well are we doing, right? How well are we doing in reaching these audience segments? Black working moms, in market auto buyers who happen to be Hispanic and so forth. And so I think that in real time, the wonderful thing about data is we can do that in real time, make adjustments. Again, you mentioned, Lataria, a brand lift study, which is very, very important. Do some A/B testing on the creative. I think all of us have seen huge improvements in the creative. right, that are reaching audiences. I know that for myself, I have these conversations with family members where we see certain ads, obviously in English, but all of the talent are what we assume are Hispanics. They're all speaking English, but they're all Hispanics. And we realize they are reaching us. They're talking to my family, right? And to our families. And so I think that there have been many brands have done much better job at that in terms of on the creative side, much better. But in terms of data measurement, analytics in real time, that's, I think, another tool that you have, right? That agencies have, media agencies have, brands have, is to be able to measure the campaign in real time.
And kind of building off of your thoughts, Joe, what other, ad tech partners or companies exist that can really help brands with their focus on reaching underrepresented communities, kind of, beyond some of the traditional, measurement that we, all still rely on. What advancements are out there that brands and agency teams can be leveraging?
They say that to a man with a hammer, the whole world is a nail, right? So my answer is always Sabio, Sabio, Sabio. But on that note, I do think, for example, I'm going to use this as an example, AAPI. It is so broad. There are so many languages and that are so different, and cultures that are vastly different between someone who is Korean or Chinese or Hmong or Vietnamese or that speaks Mandarin or Cantonese. You all understand that. And so when we lump everyone into AAPI and we think, well, we got an AAPI strategy, we have to realize that certain audience segments, now we could look at language preference, for example, and apps and those things, of course, to reach them on mobile and connected television. But I was talking to a client who is a consultant on the political side, and he was mentioning that AAPI, that there are some, for example, radio stations or newspapers that are specifically for those, they're very small audiences, right? But very powerful because they listen to one particular radio station or watch or read one particular publication. And so while I will say Sabio is the answer, again, there are other ways of reaching specific audience segments beyond just mobile and connected television, because some segments, they may be older, they may not be as technically savvy, if you will, and are still reading their local newspaper in language. So I think that the strategy specifically for AAPI, because it's so segmented, right? There's so many different smaller segments. That is where some advice that I would give.
Joe, I 100% agree. I think context is huge, right? Because you already are leveraging the affinity that communities have with certain publications. But then you also have, I think brands want to right now support diverse-owned media companies, and that's a great way to do it. So I love the fact that we're going back to that and supporting like smaller publications, podcasts, you name it, that specifically that are tailored to specific communities, because that kind of became like fell out of vogue a little while ago. So I love to see that brands and agencies are really focusing there.
And interestingly, even connected television, right? You mentioned podcasts and connected TV. There's huge growth opportunities. And so we do see, for example, in Asia, in country, more and more content being produced in language. And so those opportunities do exist on the digital side as well.
I can add here if we have the time.
Yeah,
I know
absolutely.
it's pretty difficult right now to find any large data-driven publisher that is not going to tell you that they are focused on underrepresented segments at this time. I think in my last post, I must have had 50 different cold calls or reach outs a day, a week of companies who have realized, that value platform and have figured out a way to be able to parse out audience segments. But I would caution everyone here that while almost everyone is going to have a way that their personal company uses to reach these segments, whether that be the LGBTQ community or women, or you really want to put them to the test and have them show you what they are doing in order to identify those individuals. And I'll give an example. I'm gonna give a shout out to Sabio because we've worked with them a long time. I have worked with Joe a long time, and they do a great job innovating their ad tech to ensure that they are really relevantly reaching these markets. But there are some that use keyword targeting, and if you dive deep down into where all your impressions are coming from, they could be coming from folks who have liked a Hispanic band or a pop artist who happens to be African American. And if you know anything about pop culture and what's been popular in music and in, like, that is not a homogenous audience, right? Who are listening to these key groups anymore, and is really a horrible way to actually target a diverse audience where it's not annoying, like Joe pointed out before, and he's getting these ads that really aren't necessarily meant for him or speaking to him. So you really need to, sort of put the pressure on your partners to deep dive into how they are reaching these audience. And if you reach salespeople that don't know that answer, then you're probably in the wrong place, right? So to keep to a digital scale, I guess I would always recommend a combination of the larger scale driven data ad tech partners with smaller scale endemic partners. And by endemic, I mean those publishers who exist by and for the audiences they serve. And some of those are also diverse owned, some aren't. I think on the Hispanic side, you have some powerhouses like Univision.com or the LGL Collective. And then on the African American side, you have some big notable names that are growing their digital side of the business exponentially, like BET.com or Essence, who's gone through a whole rebirth in the last couple of years. And the Urban One family of sites has, expanded their, it's just a collective of smaller sites that can get some really good reach. And then you have one-stop shop partners like MyCode, who have ways of targeting all of those audiences, but they are focused on diversity. But I think in every case, you want to make sure that you do some due diligence on the back end. And I would say to Lataria, what you were saying earlier, well, not an ad tech partner or company here, diverse influencers are essentially endemic partners. And as a group, that whole part of the industry is booming, right? We've seen campaign where your diverse influencers are outperforming other influencers. And I would also then add podcasting, which is an area that is booming. You have diverse owned and then diverse focused groups of podcasters now that can, as a group, reach a much larger scale than 3 years ago, even.
Thank you. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and kind of flip things and look a little bit more inward at, organizations and how agencies and publishers, brand partners are all kind of where and how, where we all are on our DEI journey. So Ayanna, I want to start with you, since you are in a DEI specific role at Ampersand. What measures have been put in place to meet the needs of diversity and inclusion, and what are there any best practices that you've seen either at Ampersand or in another role that you could share with the group today?
Yeah, of course. So as everybody's talking, so I'm in HR, so it's always so interesting to hear advertising conversations, and I get it, but from HR, it's a whole different. You can place us in any in any field, and we have to kind of adapt. So I think the first thing is the structure of the organization. I've been a DEI director previously. I was in an architecture firm, and then I was a nonprofit, so I've kind of seen really how different fields are doing it. But the company that I'm at now at Ampersand, I have a CEO that fully supports what DEI means. And I've been here since November, so I've been here for 6 months, and it feels a little longer given the state of the world and how we have to kind of respond. But I think it has to come from the top down. Like your CEO has to really have a message that matches the performance. And what I mean by that is when I came in, I had all these ideas and I was like, I'm gonna shake it up. And I told on a company-wide town hall, I have no problem with leaving if I'm performative. Like, call me out on performative behavior. So I think that's the first that's the first thing. Like hiring a DEI person or a DEI team, and letting that be someone's sole job. I think it's really beneficial to give someone that in completion, as opposed to making it a subsidiary of their actual job. There is so much work and there are so many things that need to be done where it's like, I'm doing my day job and I'm also doing DEI work, and you want to advocate for it, but how do you do that if you don't have the time? One of the things that we did was we implemented a diversity of slate for all of our hiring. And what that means is if there are 4 people being interviewed, there's a percentage that have to be people of color. And I say that specifically because I think that the word diverse gets thrown around a lot. And I remember when I started, it was like, we're looking for a diverse person for this. And I challenged it and I was like, do you mean people of color? Do you mean the LGBTQ community? Do you mean able-bodied? Do you mean but you want a Black woman. So say you want a Black woman in this instance, right? You want a person. So I think cleaning up the language, having a person that is responsible for DEI and proximity to leadership. So, for me, I'm one step away from my CEO. So I report to our chief people officer, and then I go to my CEO, and that makes all the difference. I don't have to go through a bunch of steps to kind of get my voice heard and to get things done. So I think those are they're kind of all over the place, but those are the circle of measures that I think are imperative to start this DEI journey.
And then kind of building on that, because as you mentioned, having someone in a specific DEI role is really critical to success. What would you say, or some of your thoughts on like a smaller organization that maybe doesn't have enough employees to create that specific DEI role, or even like the ability to build out, ERGs, how can they take measures to be inclusive and ensure that they're meeting the needs of all of their team members?
Excuse me, I think it's recognizing what you need. So if you have an organization of 10 or we're an organization of 603, I think the last time I checked, what do we have and what do we need more of? So we were a completely, from my understanding, male-run organization where it was very much a boys' club, and then from there they were like, no, we need to have more women, and then so the percentage of women increased, and then now it's like we don't have enough people of color because we need diversity of thought. And I think that is the part that people do not really connect. We don't just want, and I always say this, I don't just want people of color in the room. I don't want you to waste anybody's time because I don't want you in the room and don't give them a voice. I want you to understand with them in the room, the thought partner that comes with that is different from what you're used to. So I think breaking that down has been probably the most successful thing in moving the conversation forward. So recognizing what your company has, if you're a board of 10, or if you're an organization of 10 and everyone is a white male, then that doesn't work, right? Then you have a color issue and you have a gender issue. If you are a company that's full of women, you have a gender issue and you have a color issue. You know what I mean? Like everything is going to be so specific to your organization. And I think sometimes people take this widespread DEI approach, and it's like, if you're not just focused on your numbers, like I ask for reports to be run all the time for our entry level folks, like our issue is actually we have a diverse company at entry level, but it's that mid-level talent that we're missing. So a lot of the talk about, going to HBCUs and doing recruitment there, it sounds good, but that's actually where we don't struggle. And that's where a lot of companies don't struggle. Our campaign managers are diverse as possible, but who do they look to for mentorship? Do they see themselves kind of moving up the ladder? And if they don't see that, then I think that is the bigger issue.
Yeah, we've I hear that a lot, both internally and from other people in the marketplace, particularly with retention of employees of color, and making sure that there is a path that they see themselves able to grow within that organization, or if it's not that organization, just the industry as a whole, because I think there is, a lack of that. Latari, I would love to hear from you on this as well.
I was just kind of wanted to echo what Ayana just said about like just the idea that we're recruiting from HBCUs being like not enough. And so yes, it's great. I went to Clark Atlanta University as an HBCU. But at this point in my career, I've spent many, many years out of college. But there are other ways, like there are professional organizations, you can recruit from like MBA programs, but there's just been so much. I think unfortunately companies sometimes just check boxes, and that's like the cool thing to say, versus really thinking about, like, to your point, like what are your needs, and then how do we get there? And in advertising, there's Ad Color, which is a fantastic, organization that's just a wealth of talent that is a great source of recruiting. But just, companies being thoughtful about what their needs are and being strategic, because there's talent out there at all levels. I did see like that I guess the Fortune 500 lists increased from diverse CEOs and female CEOs recently, which is fantastic to see. We want to continue to sort of grow on that list, and like, what is it going to take for us to get there?
I so agree with what both of you have said so far on this. I would just add, it's very common for smaller organizations not maybe to have the budget to have a full-time or even part-time DEI professional on staff. But in this case, I feel that it's absolutely leadership's job to manage this as part of their duties, leading an agency or leading a brand moving forward. So, these populations trends are not going to reverse. To future-proof your agency, to do your job, this is part of your leadership role. It may not have been something you thought about actively in the past, but good leaders will have to think about this actively moving forward. I would encourage smaller agencies and brands to work with a qualified DE&I consultant. If they cannot hire someone full-time, they can, it's less expensive than a full-time person, but it is a cost. Like, you're going to have to come up with a budget for this if you have nothing now. So don't assume also that that while you know the outcome you want to reach, you know what you need to do to get there. I think a DE&I consultant can put you on the right path and start you off with some low-hanging fruit ideas to make sure that you don't make a costly misstep, because you can easily, without knowing, if you don't have any diversity right now and you've never had a DE&I program, then you should lead with the assumption that you should probably talk to a professional about how to start that program at your agency versus assuming it. So even if you have a passionate employee base who really wants to be involved actively in DE&I, those employee rosters change. So easy things to do are make sure that the programs you put in place are institutionalized. And by that, I mean, they're not one-time trainings done to a workforce that is going to change and next year is going to look very different. So have trainings for everyone at the agency, but then make sure that that gets put into your onboarding process. So that new employees get the benefit of that too. Make sure education happens every year, right? Versus just a one-time thing, and understanding that you're never really done. This is a part of a living, breathing company and agency that needs to be managed and nurtured moving forward. It's not really while there are quick things you can do to help set up the base, it's really going to be a focus and a skill set that is needed moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We've got about 5 minutes left. And I don't know if we've gotten any, sorry, I'm having like a dog issue here. Any questions submitted from our participants, but I'd like to just kind of go around the room, as it were. I'm going to start with you, Joe, what advice would you give those who are trying to identify and work with other DEI advocates? You know, what has really influenced your thinking around DEI and motivated you to really keep pushing this work forward?
Well, I think, the conversation that we were just having, it is, we recognize that ourselves as a company, the way we were founded, all of the founders are quote unquote ethnic minorities, right? We have a very diverse background, and it was just holistically grew that way. Sometimes we look around and we're like, wow, we're a really, really diverse company, which is such a beautiful thing. And I think that, to Ayana's point about leadership, so our CEO, the co-founder Aziz, this is something that's very, very important to him. And so myself, of course, and the others and all of the leaders within the company, it's something that is very important to us. Now, that being said, we have a tendency of being tribal, right? And so because it's just human nature, friend or foe, people that look like us, think like us, we have a tendency to migrate to those individuals. And so organizations that don't have a minority owned, that are not a minority owned company, or the leadership are not minorities, if you will, or ethnic minorities, or a diverse leadership. I think the challenge is to find other organizations like ColorCom as an example. You mentioned Ad Color. I think, thinking outside of the box, finding other advocates within the industry, and partnering with them, doing things like having webinars, having social gatherings, having an environment where people are meeting each other, right? Where it is very common. And the same with the recruiting and building up some of your the employees that maybe have come from an HBCU, but giving them the opportunity to meet upper management in a social setting. And those kinds of opportunities, again, that's the advice that I would give, right? Is providing opportunities on a social level within the company, and also reaching out, finding other like-minded individuals and leaders within the community.
And Ayana, from a more HR focus and perspective, what would your advice be?
I think right now we're at a place where transferable skills are important, right? I think, this great resignation has shown us that there are a lot of things. I started on higher ed and ended up in advertising. But my skill set it doesn't change, right? How I approach things, how I can sell myself in an interview, like all of these things are transferable skills. So we have to look at that when we're looking at candidates, right? We have to look at what opportunities were they given to, like, I think about internships all the time. I always tell the story that I was an RA in college because I couldn't afford to pay out of pocket. So we got housing for free if you were an RA. And there was an internship at Hot 97. It's a radio station in New Jersey and New York. And I wanted it so bad, but I couldn't afford to not work in the summer. So my white counterpart, right, was able to get a job before me because he was able to intern in the summer. So we have to look at these things in a very equitable place of, this person doesn't have this skill set, but are they willing to work and learn? And really, I'm okay with hiring the work in progress over the excellent candidate. The excellent candidate, in my opinion, the excellent candidate is going to know that they're excellent, and they got about 2 years before they're out of there to move up. The work in progress, the person that has all the potential and they just need to really learn the industry a little more, they're more dedicated to staying because they're realizing there's teaching, there's lessons to be learned. And they're more inclined to stay if they love the atmosphere of the job. And my last one is challenging respectability politics. Like, our office is a very, our dress code is very chill, right? Because I challenge, you want everybody to wear a suit at entry level. Can they afford it? Can they afford their rent and a suit? Right? Do you have to wear a suit to do your job? If you're client facing, yes. But on the everyday, we have to challenge. This generation is going to challenge respectability politics. And if they are the ones we want to bring in, they're more inclined to say, I'm going somewhere where I could wear what I want and still get my job done. So that's how I look at talent generationally. Like, who's coming in? Okay, are we giving them what they need to come in? And that's the employee is the winner right now, as we know. The employee is who we're chasing.
Thank you for that. Lataria, do you have any, love to hear from you on this as well.
Yeah, I would say that companies should sort of align on their why. And I think that does come from leadership. So for my leader, my CEO, his vision is to support the diverse creator economy. So like, how do we have, 1 million multicultural creators in our network. How do we support them? How do we ensure they're paid equitably? How do we ensure that they get brand deals? How do we prove that they're worth to brands and convince brands to use diverse creators because we know they work? And every single person in my company, myself included, is focused on that goal. Like that is, we're all sort of leaned in. So that means that the folks that are prospecting lists of creators are making sure that every single list includes diverse creators. It means that the sales team is talking about diverse creators to brands for things that are for non-multicultural campaigns, for general market campaigns. And we've seen tremendous growth in that area. And I think it not only helps our company to sort of stay focused on it, it's the right thing to do, but it also sets the example and the standard for the rest of the industry, and which will, at the end of the day, just support diverse creators. So for us, I think for any company, I think is figuring out what the why is. That's going to look different at every single company. But if you can get folks to align around that, you have gold.
Thank you. That's very insightful. Appreciate your perspective. And Jen, if you want to kind of close us out here as we wind down.
I think there's been so many good points made. I think building on what Joe talked about in terms of population and the growth centers, the Minneapolis area is about 40% diverse, which I think is surprising to a lot of people. And so it's not so much that we have a local based shortage of diverse candidates. I think, from the agency side, which is most of my experience, I would say you need to make sure that you have a budget, look outside the tried and true schools that you are constantly recruiting from, because a lot of the barriers that come to some of our diverse populations are they need to go to a school that's close, that's nearby their locations, and not all of them will have ad programs. So look into reaching them at a high school level to get them excited about and interested in marketing before they actually choose a school to grow on. That's the longer game. I get that. But then also look outside your area, be willing to pay relocation costs to folks that you can move from Chicago, from LA, from New York, from Miami, Dallas, a lot of the more, I would say, diverse population, but also marketing centers. Look into paying your interns the same rate that entry-level position would be paid. If you want to test drive an intern, then do so, but do so paying them the salary so that they can afford to take your internship with full knowledge that they're on a test drive, right? And I would say that can be successful. Also, if you waive that college degree requirement for your entry-level hires, especially if you've got a paid internship that allows them to come in and work in that role ready to learn, and then utilize the existing diverse focused programs that are out there. Like I can personally vouch for the 4A's MATE program. The candidates that come out of that program are excellent. It's like the Hunger Games trying to get them. They're so in demand right now, but they're fantastic, right? And there's a reason that they're in demand. And so they're hard pressed. I know a lot of folks in the Minneapolis area work with the brand lab, but they're, and it's tough for them to be able to manage all of the demand that they're seeing from brands to be a part of them. So look to create your own. In my last post, we created our own high school education program with a tri-district group to make sure that we taught a class and gave some of these high schoolers a glimpse into the careers that exist in media and advertising that I never knew of, and also look to expand your majors, right? I was a math and international relations major. I talked to the majority of leadership at agencies and they weren't marketing majors. They weren't they weren't advertising or media specialists coming out of college. They run the gambit of different marketing majors, and there's transferable skills there in communication and business and so many different skill sets, that's psychology, even when you're coming into marketing and understanding marketing science and the behaviors of people. So there's a lot of wider nets that you can cast even here in the Minneapolis area that can help you. But to everyone's point, there's two sides to this. You have to have the environment at home to make sure that everyone is supported and welcomed. So there may be some work you want to do internally before you even spend a lot of the money to try to recruit diverse candidates. Otherwise, you might be in a revolving door there. So that's my ending for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much to all four of you. This was a great way to spend an hour and feeling more inspired and motivated to continue this work in my own role at Media Hub. And so I just thank you all so much for your time and your thoughts and insight and hearts today. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you everyone for joining. We really appreciate it. Great discussion today. Again, quick shout out to our sponsors, Sabio, Influential, and Ampersand. If you know someone who wasn't able to make it today, this video is recorded for future viewing, and it will be posted on the i612's YouTube page, which is i612 MPLS at YouTube. So check it out in the next couple days. We'll send a link out and everything. So yeah, again, thank you everyone, and hope to see you all next time.